Well, in fewer than 24 hours, the future of social media regulation is going to fall on President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris. But what steps will they take in the regulation of an industry that has faced criticism and speculation like few others, and from Democrats and Republicans? Bloomberg social media reporter Kurt Wagner joins us now. Hey, Kurt, thanks so much for being here. It's always great to have you on the show. What do we know at this point about how the Biden-Harris administration might treat social media regulation?
The short answer is we obviously don't know a ton until everyone gets in place, and we kind of know what their priorities are, obviously, with the vaccine and the economy. I think those are going to be top priorities for the administration. But what we do know is that Democrats historically have been pretty aggressive against technology, especially against Facebook. They've had big issues with how the company handles elections, how it handles misinformation. And of course, Facebook's now also dealing with some antitrust scrutiny, right? And so I think there's a lot of different areas that Facebook in particular could be in trouble here. But until we kind of know top priorities, it's just a matter of how quickly might the new administration and Congress really get to some of this stuff.
Okay, so you mentioned historically where Democrats have been. What about Republicans, especially in light of what's happened over the last 2 weeks with the leader of their party being banned from Twitter and from Facebook and other social platforms as well?
Well, Republicans' big issue with social media has always been the control that they have over speech, right? The rules that they have in place around misinformation, they believe that it's a violation of the First Amendment. And we've seen that with calls from President Trump and other Republican politicians to repeal Section 230, right? To repeal those legal protections that these companies have to basically decide what can stay up and what comes down. So that's really been the big issue with Republicans. Obviously, that's an issue with Democrats too, but in a different way. They don't necessarily think that too much comes down. They actually want more stuff to come down there. They have a bigger issue with misinformation. So there's a lot of discussion around free speech online. How should that be applied? And clearly we've seen that play out over the last few weeks. That will be important going forward.
I'm just seeing a tweet now from Tae Kim, our colleague at Bloomberg Opinion, who's a technology columnist. He joined us recently to talk about Twitter and the business implications of banning President Trump. He's just pointing out to me right now that Twitter is the worst performing stock in the S&P 500 this year. Is that because banning President Trump has serious business implications?
I think there's concern that it will. Yeah, I looked into this a lot in late November, kind of after we knew that Trump had lost re-election. And a lot of the feedback I got when I talked to analysts and people who followed the company closely was, hey, this is going to maybe hurt a little bit at the beginning, but long term, people go to Twitter for all kinds of things, not just US politics, right? But that was under the assumption that President Trump would still be on Twitter. He might not be president anymore, but he would still be tweeting. Now that he's off Twitter entirely and kind of threatening to bring a large portion of his base somewhere else, perhaps to Parler or a different service, I think that's where people get nervous, right? It's not just that he's not president anymore, but that he's threatening to bring a large chunk of his following to another service.
So this is so interesting to me. And we should note, too, that the year is young, right? We're 19 days into the year. So worst performing stock in the first 19 days of the year. It's so interesting to me that you talk about the Democrats' relationship with technology and the way that it's evolved, really. I mean, since the Obama administration. We think back to the Obama administration. We think that, they had this very cozy relationship with tech companies, with Silicon Valley. Fast forward 4 years, 8 years, 12 years. What does that look like now with Democrats and how Silicon Valley is feeling about a Democratic administration?
Well, I think that there's always been this connection because a lot of people in Silicon Valley, a lot of the employees at these companies lean Democrat, right? It's no secret that these companies have largely left-leaning employee bases. And so as a result, a lot of the money gets donated to candidates on the left, stuff like that. But I think what we've seen here is we've seen Democratic politicians really take issue with the control and power that these companies have, right? You look at a Facebook and suddenly they're now being brought in question about acquisitions they made almost a decade ago. And those are the types of issues that I think are going to plague these companies moving forward, is that Democrats in particular think that these companies have gotten too big, they've gotten too powerful, and now they need to kind of course correct in that front. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we see some type of antitrust legislation, for example, that really impacts the Facebooks and Googles of the world.
Yeah, there's finally some bipartisan agreement, and it comes when tech is in the crosshairs. Bloomberg's Kurt Wagner in San Francisco. Kurt, always great to see you. Thanks so much for your time and for joining us on Quick Take this afternoon.
The biggest stories the moment they happen from around the globe. Subscribe to Bloomberg Quick Take now for insight in an instant.